Running backs in fantasy football are the most volatile picks you can make, also the most important, so it's crucial to know which ones to scratch off your list and never draft, ever look at, because you don't want to lose a league. So here are the running backs you cannot catch me, and I hope none of you guys drafting in fantasy football this year. Real quick before we get into it, make sure to like this video. It helps me and this channel out an insane amount. You don't even know. The first player here is Aaron Jones, and let's look at the numbers before you skip through this part of the video, because there is something to uncover here. Aaron Jones is still increasing in carries per game. That is true. And he's still getting some usage in the pass game. Is it going down? Yes. Slightly? Yeah, it's not that big of a deal. But somehow he's also decreasing in fantasy points per game. If you look at his statistics from the past 3 years, 15.5 fantasy football points per game in 2021, then 12.9 2022, and then last year in 2023 he was down to 10.9 fantasy football points per game. So something has to give. What is happening that's making his fantasy points go down? And that number is touchdown regression. And if you've been around this page for long enough, you understand that touchdowns, for the most part, is a pretty volatile stat that we can't predict. Now, a lot goes into it, like red zone usage, how often teams get into the red zone, and how good their offense is. But taking all of that into account, this is a running back in Aaron Jones that's going from honestly a top offense with the Packers to a bottom offense with the Vikings led by Sam Darnold. And this really does hurt for Aaron Jones because running backs rely the most on offenses pretty much out of every single position in fantasy football, at least, because touchdowns are just so much more fantasy points compared to a rushing yard. 10 rushing yards, even 100 rushing yards is amazing in football. It's only 10 fantasy points. And 99% of the time, what makes a serviceable running back good in just skill level is being on a good or top offense. And you could also make the case that, well, in bad offenses with a bad quarterback, there's going to be more opportunities for checkdowns. And while that may be true, it's not as sound of a statistic. More often than not, the offense's inability to be able to get first downs and move down the field is a lot more of a downgrade than checkdowns from a bad quarterback on a bad team with an offense that doesn't move is. If anything, it'll grade out to be neutral, but it's not something that you can hold on to and say, well, this offense is going to be bad, so he's going to get checkdowns to be valuable. Even if he gets 10 checkdowns a game, if he doesn't score a touchdown or barely gets any yards from it, again, there's not that much opportunity. And just to preface that, 10 checkdowns a game is literally impossible. I guess it's not impossible, but it's not going to happen. But Aaron Jones is still a decent running back. We've seen him put up numbers. I guess he's fine. But if none of that is enough to tell you that you should probably look away from him, you can get all of that in a 5th, 6th round pick. I would think an 8th round pick is what you would be getting all of that at, but you have to take a 5th round draft pick, all of that draft capital to get Aaron Jones. Now that might not seem too bad name wise. I'm really just trying to tell you guys it's not a good pick. That's right next to other running backs like Kenneth Walker, like James Conner, 2 guys I think are going to be better than him this season. Now, do I think any of these running backs are good picks? That's a concept for a whole nother video, but if you would still take him over those running backs, look at the overall ADP and what players would be drafting right next to him. Number 1, you got Anthony Richardson, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, Zay Flowers, George Kittle. If you're taking any of those guys after Aaron Jones, we need to have a real conversation, and you must need to subscribe to this page because you need some more fantasy football help. He is a massive outlier, a 30-year-old running back. Talk about running back regression. We can get into all of that as far as age goes and average age per fantasy point. I talk about that way too much on this page. He's a 30-year-old running back in a terrible offense, bottom 6 offense projected. But before I get to the next player that we know for a fact will be a bomb and absolutely terrorize our entire roster if we do draft him, make sure to hit that follow button. 90% of you guys watching this video aren't subscribed to this channel, which is absolutely amazing because we're hitting the homepage. But how are you going to win fantasy football and win every single week if you don't follow this page and get the videos? The next running back on this list is being taken in about the same ADP range. It is DeAndre Swift. This is more of an ADP and roster construction issue than it is a DeAndre Swift issue. Here is his ADP on screen. I think we're going to have a way better chance if we go 1 or 2 running backs in the first few rounds of fantasy football so we can slam wide receiver value in the middle rounds. Now, I do think you need to be finishing at least the first 4 rounds with 2 good wide receivers. You can't get anything less than that or you're setting yourself up for failure. But we need to be slamming wide receiver value in those middle rounds because just look at the players being drafted next to DeAndre Swift in the 5th round. Just within the same couple picks, not running back wise, we have, again, George Kittle, George Pickens, Tank Dell, Kyle Pitts, Joe Burrow, Ramondre Stevenson, all clearly a difference in value at the ADP. But Swift himself, why is he not a good pick? That's what matters, right? Well, in 2021, he averaged 14 fantasy points a game. In 2022, it went down to 12. And then last year with the Eagles in 2023, he went down to 11 fantasy points a game, clearly showing regression. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think these numbers alone really depict who he is as a running back. He's switched teams a bunch of times, hasn't had a lot of time to really just acclimate to an offense and a scheme and coaching. But his receiving role declining is really what the problem is. We've always seen him as this PPR PPR monster in fantasy football. He's just that guy that's going to get receptions and be a fine option because he has that floor. Well, he went from 5 receptions in 2021 on average a game to 3.4, and then last year to 2.5. And as of now, he goes to the Chicago Bears, who have been running a committee backfield for the longest time when they can, and the backfield really hasn't changed that much. They still have Khalil Herbert in the backfield. They still have Roschon Johnson, two guys that were fighting for position all year long. Then that introduces the next question. If all of these other running backs are going to get 5% of the work, DeAndre Swift will stick with like 80%. That's fine. How good is Caleb Williams really going to be? I'm sure he'll be good enough with all of these offensive weapons to be somewhat serviceable to get this offense moving and be in a better situation, not like Aaron Jones. But again, the draft price comparison with DeAndre Swift and all these other players just does not match. And if he's a receiving back, and they do have Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and they also have DJ Moore still, how much check down work is really going to be going DeAndre Swift's way? But again, I just love taking a running back or two in the first couple rounds, slamming wide receiver in the middle, and then getting high upside running backs after round 5 or 6. But next up on this list, it does pain me to say, if you see that Commanders jersey in the back, also don't pay attention. It is a Chase Young jersey. I'm not going to take it down yet, okay? Unless one of you guys want to gift me another one, I'm not taking it down. But do not skip this video, because I know for most people, Austin Ekeler is just an instant ick. Nobody wants to look at this pick. I understand that, which is why he's also on this list. But let me run through it really quick for you. He's going as the RB31 in fantasy football in the round 7 to 8 range. Now, that's a little bit too high for my opinion, but that's besides the point and not exactly why he's a bad pick. Because like I was talking about earlier in the video, when you get these late round running backs, you want to be going straight for value. And this is why I preach making sure your first couple rounds in fantasy football are very, very solid and proven guys. Because when you get that really solid base, you can take these later round picks and go a little bit more high upside. There's no point in taking a solid player in the late rounds like 8 and after, because a solid player is only going to get you 8 points. Go for the high upside plays. The Nico Collins, the Puka Nakuas from last season. These guys were being taken in this round and finished as top 10 guys. And this range, statistically in fantasy football, is where you find the most of those breakouts because there's so much room to improve. Now, it is hard to do, but if you guys do want a video on those middle to late round breakout players, just let me know in the comments and I'll formulate a video for you guys. But the first strike on his profile is obviously going to be his age. He went from 20 fantasy points a game 3 years ago to 11 last year. But now he comes to Washington with a worse overall offense than the Chargers total had over the past few seasons, I guess excluding last year because everybody was injured. And he has way more running back competition than he has ever had in his entire career. And that's what made Austin Ekeler a cheat code, because he was the only featured running back in their offense. Nobody else even got close, and he was the king in receptions a game. Brian Robinson is a pretty good running back. And he comes to Washington with Jaden Daniels, who's going to take a good amount of the rushing work and rushing touchdowns in the red zone most of the time. And he's 30 years old. This is probably the worst personal move for fantasy football that could have happened to Austin Ekeler. 100%, if not 90% of his value is going to have to come from the receiving game, because they replaced Antonio Gibson with him. And Brian Robinson is a fine power between the tackles kind of running back. Not to mention, this offensive line for the Commanders is absolutely atrocious, so that's not going to help him at all. But if you look at the other players being drafted next to him, yes, RB31 sounds pretty late, like it doesn't matter, but guys drafted next to him are Hollywood Brown, potential wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs; Rashee Rice, another potential wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs if he plays the entire season; Deontay Johnson, Pollard, 3 running back slots in front of him. That doesn't make sense. The next guy here is James Conner, and I will go through this one quick because it feels like I'm hating on every single round 4 to 5 running back, which is kind of true. Again, I don't like the way rosters construct when you draft running backs in this range. You don't have to go running back or wide receiver. You can get a tight end or quarterback. There's a lot of good ones. But he's only played more than 13 games in 1 out of 7 seasons. A lot of the times you can't really say statistically that people are going to get injured, but it's kind of just a fact now. Adding on the fact that he's 29 years old, he's pretty injury prone coming into this year as well, which is exactly why the Cardinals have backup running backs and drafted Trey Benson this year. But if we look at last year, James Conner will go down for a few weeks, and Amari DeMarcado, a bunch of random running backs that we've never heard the name of, become serviceable guys, and then they just have a role for the rest of the season, even if it's not 100%. On top of all that, the Cardinals defense is absolutely atrocious. So what that means is the game script is going to be very pass heavy. There's not going to be a lot of instances when the Cardinals are up in games when they can just smash the running backs and just pause, bro. Wait, hold on. The rushing attempts and just usage in general are going to be lower for the Cardinals than they would be for other teams like the Lions that are going to be winning a majority of their games. And you also have Kyler Murray, who's a good rushing quarterback that's going to take some of the rushing attempts, yards, touchdowns, all of that bad / good stuff. Conner is going to be nothing more than a game script dependent running back. Now that sounds a lot worse than it is sometimes, but he's still being drafted pretty high in drafts for what he is. Now if you're mid-draft or you just kind of like James Conner still, regardless of all these facts, let's just look at the fantasy football schedule. They have probably the number one hardest start to the fantasy football schedule in the first 4 to 5 weeks. And they also have the third worst fantasy football playoff schedule on top of that. So there's no way, because you have a really hard start to the season. James Conner might get injured halfway through, and then the fantasy football playoff schedule is even harder. Like, it's just not a good pick. It doesn't make any sense. I'd rather not deal with the headache and the potential bust of James Conner. Pause again. But that is going to finish off this video. Thank you so much for watching it all the way through. I will see you guys in the next one coming soon, and make sure to be followed so you don't miss those.